once you get feedback that is tangible, that is actionable, you would be foolish not to listen to it, take it on, and actually do it, especially if that's where your passion is. It is that moment of, can I hear the feedback? Am I able to absorb that feedback and turn it into actionable insights?
Hello, I'm your host, Sam East, and welcome to Diverse, a sweet podcast. I'm excited to welcome Audrey McCormack to the show today. Audrey is the opening keynote at SWE's upcoming WE Local Dublin conference, where she'll be speaking on crafting careers from failure, reframe, rise, and lead. She began her career as a qualified electrician and has gone on to lead major startup programs, global strategic initiatives, and operational excellence efforts. Today, Audrey is the Senior Director, Research and Commercialization Facility Lead at MSD Ireland. Audrey, I'm so looking forward to getting into all the things here, all the topics about failure and how we rise up from it. Welcome to Diverse.
Sam, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here, and I'm so excited actually to be the opening keynote for Dublin. I actually started my SWE journey about 2 years ago in Munich in one of the side rooms doing a snap session. So actually to go from being in that side room to being up on stage for the keynote is like unbelievable. I can't believe it myself. So watch out, can't wait for Dublin.
Yes, and I mean, we have spoken to so many different people on the podcast, but to hear from someone who's been all over the map in Europe, I can't wait to get into this conversation with you.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting.
Well, you started your career, as we said off the top, as a qualified electrician, which seems like, it's a unique entry point into engineering, into operations, especially as a woman in the field. What really drew you to this path, and what was that early experience like?
Sam, I always get asked this question, and I always go back to maybe when I speak to crafting careers from failures. My entry in as an electrician was actually from failure. It is one of the talking points that I will speak to when we get to the Dublin conference, and it's one of the part of my keynote. But from a really young age, I was always really interested in technical fields. I loved physics, I loved maths, and I loved chemistry. But back then, I actually went to an Irish convent school. Career guidance wasn't really as developed as it is today. So when I talked about my enthusiasm for engineering, my advisors didn't have that much insight into the options. Standard career paths were business or nursing. So when I came and said, I want to be an engineer, it wasn't really that common. And then, like, I talk a little bit in my keynote now about how I went to do my college applications, faced a bit of a setback. You will hear more about that in Dublin in April, so I won't tell you too much more. But I actually had an unexpected turn that drove me into becoming an electrician. I was sponsored my first year by the state. I really had to prove myself. I worked as a contractor. I put lights in cowsheds. I did industrial applications, motor control, PLCs. And then I really kind of went on from there to working across 5 or 6 different industries. I've worked in food, I've worked in pharma, I've worked in high tech, and now I'm in biotech. So, being a female electrician, I really was a trailblazer in the field. I was the only female in a room full of male colleagues. I suppose it's the image of my career over the years have always been maybe one of the very few females in the room. I have found both positive and negative aspects from being the one and only woman in the room. Back in the day, I would have found the older male colleagues treated me with a lot of respect and really cared and make sure I was included. I did have some pretty poor experiences as well, because when I did my apprenticeship 30 years ago, so the world wasn't really where it is at the moment. I faced a lot of bullying. I overcame that. I actually used it as a lot of motivation to push me forward. And I actually ended up winning Apprentice of the Year as an electrician. I used that bullying and that poor experience, that negative experience, to push me forward as motivation. I would say, thankfully, the world has matured. Women in STEM is so much more common, and there's so much more progress in everything STEM related with females in the industry. But coming from that background of facing the challenges as being an early trailblazer, I am a huge advocate for women in STEM and the power of inclusion and making sure that women understand that they have a place in the workshop, if that makes sense.
Well, it's fantastic to hear, how much things have progressed from the beginning of your career to now. But I'm wondering, in the beginning, when you were one of few or maybe the only women working in your field, how did you tap into that strength to keep going despite not seeing other women represented in the field?
It's a bit of a novelty, I have to be honest. It's a little bit of a novelty being the only woman in the room as well. So I reveled in it a little bit, knowing that I was a bit of a trailblazer. But, when the times are tougher and you're facing negativity and challenges, then you have to dig deep and you have to really understand why you're doing it. I go back to when I was in secondary school and technical subjects were my passion. My view for where I wanted to be in my career was in an engineering field. So I just let that passion and purpose drive me forward. So even in the low moments, I knew why I was there and why I wanted to do it. I also knew that I was probably going to make it easier for the women who were following me in that space as well. So I think they were the things that drove me forward in those early years. And it's really nice now to be able to reflect back on it. And even with my children, they're very proud of the fact that their mom is, a qualified electrician. I can wire a house. So there's a little bit of pride in it as well with my children these days.
Can you take us into a moment in your career that challenged you? Maybe it felt like failure at the time, but it pushed you to become better.
I do actually. So I talked a little bit there about the failure at the beginning of my career that drove me into being an electrician. But I have to say, like, you look at a career journey and you see, a really picture perfect journey of the number of promotions you have, the number of lateral moves. So if you look at somebody's CV, you see all of those advancements or all of the jobs they get. I think the career failure that I'm going to speak about is something that's woven throughout your career journey, and that's actually not a single event. It's woven all the way through. It's all of those opportunities that you didn't get, that you were unsuccessful at. So people are impressed at the progress and the opportunities I've embraced, but behind that pathway lies every instance where I didn't succeed. I would say what I've learned from those is to sit and listen and hear the feedback and understand what those moments are telling you and how you need to absorb that information to enable yourself to craft the next step in your journey, the next move, your next promotional or lateral outcome. So, Sam, if I was to say there's not one point of failure that I could talk to, but I do think for every time that I've been successful in my career, the times that I maybe was unsuccessful over roles that I went for probably outnumber my successes.
And that never deterred you from pushing forward.
Well, do you know what? At the earlier stage of my career, it was demotivating. But as you mature, you actually recognize it as feedback. Early in my career, I really took that rejection to heart. I found it hard to understand why I wasn't selected. Over time, I've learned to view that as feedback. But I do recall wanting to transition from engineering to operations. After the interview, I was told I didn't have the required process experience. In response, I went back to college. I did courses in biotechnology, microbiology, and I reapplied, and then I was successful. I have to say that was one of the pivotal moments of my career was when I moved from engineering into operations. And that was because I listened. I stopped and I listened, heard the feedback and made sure that I was ready for the role when it came up again. Actually, I have another example, where I listened to that feedback. So the first time I went for a director level role, I shifted my strategy. I spoke to how I felt like I was the right person for the role. In that interview, I actually went in identifying the gaps between me and the role. So I acknowledged in advance areas that I probably wasn't 100% on. And I actually demonstrated in the interview how I plan to close those gaps. There's this famous quote, isn't there, that a woman will look at a job application and they'll see the list of 10 things and they'll say, I can do 7 out of the 10 and I don't think I should go for the role. I think women should reframe it. They should look at the 7 out of 10. They should look at the 3 that they feel they have a gap for and figure out how to close those gaps and present that plan in the interview. So rather than not go for the role, be very, very clear on how I'm going to demonstrate that I am the right person. And if I'm not the right person right now, here's the actions that I plan to take to make sure that I am the right person.
Showing a level of how proactive you're willing to be.
And a level of self-awareness. You're not 100% on every skill that they're looking for, but also highlight the areas that you bring that maybe other candidates don't bring. Highlight your strengths, but also show how you're going to close those gaps.
Do you remember at that point when you were making the transition, what the feedback was that you really sat and processed?
Yeah, it was technical feedback and it was very valid. So at that transition between engineer and operations, I understood the equipment. I understood how to operate the equipment, but I didn't understand the science behind it. When you look at moving into it was biotechnology operations, you have to know the science. You have to know a certain aspect of the science, not deep level science. We have scientists for that, but I absolutely needed to know a fundamental level of how our processes were running. The feedback I got was very, very valid. And once you get feedback that is tangible, that is actionable, you would be foolish not to listen to it, take it on, and actually do it, especially if that's where your passion is. It is that moment of, can I hear the feedback? Am I able to absorb that feedback and turn it into actionable insights?
And I think, you tapped into something there because your confidence can take a hit after the quote unquote failure or the rejection. That can be the struggle. Can you share more on how to rebuild that confidence, how to move forward, after whatever that incident is, to trust yourself to go for the bold risks again?
Yeah, I do think rebuilding confidence is really about rebuilding trust in yourself. So you really do need to shift separating who you are from what happens. Just because you get feedback on one thing, it's not a reflection on you. Feedback, failure, challenge, whatever you want to call it, it's data. You have to figure out what you're going to do with that data. And one outcome doesn't erase your ability to make good decisions or be the right person for a role. It just means that there's a data point that you need to address. And I think the confidence comes back through action. So not reflection alone. So you can sit, sometimes if you reflect on the failures, you can become absorbed by it. I will tell you instances in my keynote about moments that really affected my confidence early in my leadership career, stepping into demanding roles during personal upheaval happening in the background. And what really helps you rebuild your confidence isn't ignoring the disruption, but recognizing the capabilities you're developing and taking small actions to learn to rebuild that trust in yourself. And you can prove that you can adapt. As I say, I got the feedback on the interview that I needed process experience. I adapted, I recovered, I went for the role again and I delivered. So once you start reframing that moment where you see it as failure, it's not, it's a data point in your career and you need to figure out what you're going to do with that data point. Are you going to reflect on it or are you going to action it?
We talked a lot about individual action that can be taken, but as a leader, how do you create space for your team to feel comfortable taking those risks, quote unquote, failing, while still, maintaining integrity, accountability, especially in very high stakes environments like healthcare?
It's interesting because you talk about risk taking and you want to enable your team to take risks, but you need to set some boundaries around the risks that can be taken. It can't be a blank slate. So you have to be really, really clear about what can't be risky and then be deliberately flexible in other areas. You talk about in healthcare and we're delivering medicines for patients. So in healthcare, patient safety, product quality, compliance, they're the non-negotiables. And even, team safety. So I talk about healthcare specifically, but in operations, our team safety is priority as well. We have a phrase here and it's safety first, quality always. When you can put those guardrails around what the team can have freedom to experiment in, how they can challenge assumptions and say this didn't work, then you're at least giving them the correct boundaries to operate in. So that's create the boundaries. But then the other piece is about when they can learn from failure. So you want to, separate learning failures from preventable failures. So you can learn through thoughtful experimentation, trying something new with the right controls in place and discover, it didn't deliver the outcome we were hoping for. And that's like hypothesizing where you expect to be. That's absolutely acceptable and essential. But preventable failures, so cutting corners, ignoring data or bypassing, agreed procedures and processes. That's not the space you want to be in a learning from failures. So it's about setting the boundaries, but then also setting the when and, where it's acceptable to have that. I do think there are some enablers, Sam, to enable the team. We have to, as leaders, enable psychological safety with our team, but the accountability for failure still needs to be credible as well. So when something goes wrong, my first question is generally, what did we learn? What assumptions were we hoping to prove that proved false? What do we do differently next time? It really does signal to the team that honesty matters more than perfection, but at the same time, you want to be explicit on ownership, and everything has to have clear ownership, success criteria, and really, really, really clear checkpoints. I saw this phrase once, and it's freedom without clarity isn't empowering, it's unfair. If we give our team freedom without clarity around the boundaries of that freedom, it is unfair when they fail. We haven't set them up correctly. I think the other pieces here, Sam, are around, you talked about high stakes environments. We're dealing in my facility, at least, with multi-million dollar batches. Leaders have to normalize early escalation. So people have to be comfortable with escalating risks, even when it's really small and uncomfortable, because if we're late with those escalations, it becomes critical. So I do actively reward my team for speaking up early, even when it's bad news. They come to me and you see the bad news coming, you can see it coming a mile away, but I prefer for them to come with the bad news. And that's how we actually protect the patients, the teams, and actually make the teams more resilient. Ultimately, again, accountability is not about blame, it's about trust. I talked about, rebuilding trust in yourself after failure, being able to take those risks again. It's all about trust. So if you're balanced in trust and people know the boundaries, the expectations, and that they won't be punished for thoughtful risk taking, they will bring their best thinking to the table. And that's when you get safety and innovation, even in the most regulated environments.
For women and for allies who are listening to this right now, who may be experiencing a setback, what is one thing that they can do right now to start to reframe the experience to move through it with more confidence?
It's a really great question, Sam. And this is one I've asked myself a few times. So, one thing I would say, especially to women, is this: try to resist the instinct to immediately label that setback as a personal failure. I think I've said a few times, failure is not, it's not personal, it's not a label, it's data. You have to ask yourself a very different question. A link to, your previous question, what's this moment training me for? Because very often the skills you're building in that moment of challenge, call it challenge rather than failure, you're building resilience, you're building prioritization, adaptability. And these are a lot of skills that you're going to need in the next chapter of your leadership journey. I will touch on this in the keynote speech as well, so I can't wait to share more. But I always love quoting, right? This is another quote from Nelson Mandela, and I love this quote. I never lose or I never fail. I either win or I learn. So you either win or you learn something new. So as females, we need to just resist that instinct to label ourselves as a personal failure. We need to figure out, have we won or did we learn something? And confidence doesn't always come when everything is going smoothly. It comes from surviving things that sometimes you once thought would break you and realize they didn't. And sometimes at the time, setbacks can feel isolating. I actually have experienced, setbacks that I felt shameful. I expected more from myself. I didn't get the outcome that I was looking for. But as you distance yourself from those failures and you become those experiences, they actually sharpen your judgment and they deepen your empathy as a leader. And then there's another practical thing that people can do is don't ask, why is this happening to me? Like I found myself in that space as well. You kind of go, oh my God, why is this happening to me right now? What we should be asking ourselves is, what action can I take here to move forward past this challenge? Even in the difficult, circumstances, you make one decision, you take one action, those small steps, they're all steps forward. And that kind of momentum builds confidence and it moves you past that challenge. And I think the last piece I would say is don't go through a setback silently. We all have great support systems around us. Speaking about challenges, whether it's through a mentor, a peer, a friend, it doesn't weaken your credibility, it strengthens it. I actually found once you're sharing vulnerability, even with your team, they see you as more human. So I would have my own, I call it my board of advisors that I lean on in tough times. And I would advise everyone to figure out who's your board of advisors. And they're the people that you trust that will, give you the advice, will actually maybe challenge you back if you're wallowing or reflecting too deeply on a failure, and they will help you move through it. So give yourself permission to be human and make it easier for others to do that as well. So if you're in the middle of it right now, my message is you don't have to have the whole picture figured out. You just need to keep moving. So figure out what those few steps you need to do are. Keep learning. Trust that this is a chapter. It's adding capability that you haven't needed yet, but you will. And make sure that you've got that trusted board of advisors that you can talk to so you don't feel isolated in that moment. So that would be my advice, really.
Well, this has been such an awesome, informative talk, Audrey. Before we let you go, we've been chatting about this a little bit. You're going to be delivering the opening keynotes at WE Local Dublin. Can you give us a little sneak peek into some moments there, maybe something you're the most excited about?
I think it touches a little bit on, that last question. So the journey that I plan to share is extremely personal. It's not the polished career path that if anybody wants to look me up on LinkedIn, you can look me up on LinkedIn, you're going to see one career path. What you're going to hear about in Dublin is the real everyday challenges that people face outside of work. And I really want to share with people how I've experienced those personal challenges along with my career, how I've been able to reframe those challenges, rise up with new skills, and lead with empathy because I really understand the impact of these external influences on everybody's career. So, my keynote is really focused on embracing my personal story, my journey, and how it's impacted and influenced my career. And I hope it will really help others embrace their story.
I could see already how people's minds will be turning, how they'll be inspired by everything that you've had to share. Audrey, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sam. It's been so nice to be here. And if Dublin is anything like this podcast, I cannot wait. So bring it on.
Oh, it might be a touch more fun in
I
Dublin, I
hope so.
think.
I hope so.
Well, Audrey is the opening keynote at SWE's 2026 WE Local Dublin Conference, taking place in just a few days, April 23rd to 24th. So if you've been on the fence and hearing Audrey's perspective on failure is making you rethink what's possible, visit welocal.swe.org to snag your ticket and join us. WE Locals are designed to bring engineers of all genders and career stages together for professional development, leadership growth, and networking around the world. And we really hope to see you there. I'm Sam East, and from all of us at SWE, thank you for listening.